Okay, so today we're introducing RESTful web services with JWT. Okay, so this will give you an introduction to what's going on, hopefully. So, I guess RESTful basis for us, normally a RESTful API, they're meant to be stateless. That means each request from a client must include all the data required to process the request. So you can't be sending over a username and password every time you want to do something. Particularly when we're talking about services between one website and another website, which is what we'll be doing in a short period of time, that's particularly important. We want to be able to maintain security and have some kind of, and not if you like having the user sending these credentials or whatever. And the real answer to doing all of this is to use a system called token-based authentication. Okay. Now, the general concept of token-based authentication is simple. A user would enter login credentials and receive a token in return. That token would then allow them to access data for a specific site, maybe for a specific period of time, or specific types of services or whatever. It's very, very similar to what we've done. It's actually the same as what we've done earlier in the semester when we were dealing with the movie database. Okay, so we logged in, if you remember, we logged out the movie database, we got our API key, which is a JWT token, and then we had to use the JWT token every time we wanted to access services from the site itself. So roughly what happens, this sort of a idea behind it, somebody would, using POST as a method, would be able to authenticate themselves with a username and password. Again, looking back to the movie database, we had to sign up for it, then we had to log in and we get our token then. What the movie database done then was they gave us our bearer token, as it's called, our JWT token, which is a long string that we might remember we used, and then every time we wanted to use the service, we sent that token, which is the API underscore key, that's the term they were using, that's the general term that is used for these keys, across to the server with a request then for what we were looking for. So it could have been a particular genre of film, or it could have been a particular year, or it could have been a particular TV show or whatever. They would then process that on their side, make sure it was a valid API key, and if everything was okay, they would then send you the requested data back. And that essentially is the data flow that we'll be implementing now ourselves. Okay. So it's JWT, it stands for JSON Web Tokens. Used to identify an authenticated user. It's issued by an authentication server, so that would be the JWT server, and then it's consumed or used by the client server, so it would be your JWT client as such. So there are two websites as such, the JWT server, which is the authenticated server, that's the one that's got the information, the data that we want. So in the movie database, it had all the information that on different movies and who were in them and all that kind of good stuff. We were creating our own website, which was accessing information from that. So we were, if you like, their client. We in turn could have had our own clients then who were coming to us from a browser. So this is where it gets a wee bit confusing. You have a browser, you have then the client server, and then you actually have the web server itself that has all the data information. So there's kind of three people in the relationship. What is JWT? It's an open industry standard used to share information or data between two entities, usually an app front end and a back end server. This is sometimes used as well internally in organizations to send information from maybe one device to, or one particular system to a different system, if you wished. Okay. We could also contain JSON objects with info that needs to be shared, and they can be encrypted for added security. So sometimes within the JSON token, there is space there for a payload, and we can put information into that, which could be of interest in the whole communication. Again, depends on the application, what we would be doing. It's structured, and it is three parts to it. There's a header, a payload, and a signature. So the header, it identifies the signing algorithm that's going to be used. So there's an encryption algorithm that's used. It also will have another part to it, which is a type of token. Normally that's JWT, okay, in the standard. and it is then encrypted with base 64, which is kind of binary text encryption. So essentially puts everything as ones and zeros, but it then converts it back, and we can display it as text. So it's a form of encryption that takes place there. The payload then, it contains the content, or what's also known as claims, and you can if you Google uses JWT, and in it would have details as to who issued it, who's it for, all that kind of good stuff. So there's lots of different claims that you can get within JSON. That payload is also base 64 encrypted. And then there's a signature, and the signature has been encrypted using the secret key. And what actually happens with the signature is it uses a special key, it encrypts the header, the payload, and the special key together, and that gives it then a combination of ones and zeros that it can add in as a signature. What happens then is whenever the token is being used, it'll then be decoded. It'll only be decoded correctly if obviously it can be decoded, and then within the decoding it will be able to verify whether or not the token is actually being modified. So you can't just go and change information kind of willy-nilly in it. Here's kind of an idea of it here. So base 64, type JWT, the algorithm, in this case HSS256. There's different algorithms, it depends on what you're using. You can use whatever algorithm you like, provided there's supported by your programming language, and that would be both or that's just programming on the actual server itself, so you can make your own up if you want to. The payload then, again B64, so that could be, for example, your name and surname, it could be your user ID, it could be whatever, okay, so it depends on the application really. And then the last bit then, the signature then has been encrypted with the header and the payload and the secret key. So it combines the three down and encrypts the whole thing up. So you'll see there the light blue bit, didn't come out too good there, is the header, the middle bit here which is the payload, and then the last bit then is the signature. Why use it? Reduce the likelihood of malicious attack. It also means as well that you can actually control stuff. So you could, for example, put in as part of your payload what type of user it is and what services they would get access to. So you control the access that somebody would have. It could be, if you bear in mind, well, we were using the movie database, we could use it so many times for free a day. So by somehow being able to identify what token is coming in, you could then implement something like that on the server side. The token is a string which, when correctly decoded, can reveal the hidden content, and that hidden content we could do what we like with, and that's, again, up to ourselves what we want to do with it. So then there's some sample code there on Moodle. I just want to do a bit of a walkthrough on it. The actual JWT class, that's one that I've got there. You see, read through to see who actually wrote it. There's a couple of different functions in there. This is just standard PHP, so you can look through and see what's actually going on yourself in the code. There's a decode function and there's an encode function. So the encode function is obviously the one you use first. There's a payload, so that's what you want to put in the payload. There's a key, and then there's the algorithm. The default algorithm is HS256, so it's the default one that's been used. There's the decode then, which has the JWT code key, has the key, and then has verify returned true, but that would be the default value anyhow. Then these two functions are the two that we will be using in terms of we will encode and we will decode. So we obviously encoding these are services that are used on the server. Okay, these functions. The actual client doesn't use any of this, so the client doesn't have to have access to the JWT_class.php file. It's just the server that has to have that. In order for these two, that you'll see when you're looking at them, there are a couple of other internal functions that are used, which is the sign function, a JSON decode, a JSON encode, a URL safeb64 decode, a URL safeb64 encode, and a handle JSON error code function as well. So you don't really need to know about any of them as such, but I just thought I'd show you the code there. Do have a look at that JWT_class.php file. Now, in a very simple, this is just kind of one file that's doing everything. So the next part you'll be separating this into a client and a server. So we're just one bit of code here. We're going to require once JWT class.php. I'm creating a token which is an array. I'm giving it a ID of 20. Sorry, we set ID equal to 20. Then I've got token ID is equal to $ID. So it's the actual ID I'm giving it is the value 20 in this case here. I'm then doing a JWT encode. So this is remember this would be the server side. So there's access to the JWT class, and it's doing an encode, passing in the token, and then passing in the secret server key. Okay, so we'll just have the secret underscore server underscore key. And then I've got, so that would encode the token. You'll see down here I'm printing out the token, so it's $JWT. So we see what the token looks like. And then I'm decoding the token. So if you like, if somebody requested a token from, say a client requested a token, they would provide me with the token ID as part of their kind of registration process. I would then use encode to create a token, send that token back to them, and then every time they wanted to do something, they would have to send that token to me, or that API underscore key to me. I would get it then, and I then have to go and decode it. So I decode it, and when I have it decoded, I can then get access to the token, because when I do decode it, it returns the actual token, which is the content, the payload in the middle. Okay, maybe payload would have been a better question there. So then what I'm doing here is I'm echoing the JWT token that would have come back from the server, and then here I am printing out the token. So I've decoded it, and then I'm just showing here how I can access a particular item within the token. So I'm just doing another way of actually looking at that token and its ID. Okay, so what does that look like in real money? This is it here. So I'll just refresh this page here. You see here the token is this stuff here. So if you look at it, you'll see here that there's a period at this point, and there's a period at this point. So this is the full API keys, JWT key. The first bit there to the first period is the header, then we have the payload, and then we have the signature. Okay, down here I've decoded, I've just done a printer of the token, which gives the ID is 20. Here I've just actually printed out the 20 itself, so we can just see it like that. Okay, I could go in and I could change the value of ID and try it again, and we'd have a different piece would come out here. Okay, so that's something worth doing and seeing yourself how it looks like. Okay, but that's the code, nothing too complex on it. Okay, now that we've got that, and I would suggest of course that you do that previous page and get it working before you move on to this. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and create a JWT web service. So we're looking at a situation where we're going to have a situation where we'll have a client and a server. So I'll just call it JWT client and JWT server. JWT server, it'll be the one that has access to the JWT underscore class.php file. For this example, what I'm suggesting is we'll use the database that we used last year with the movie, or not the movie database, the my shop, the music shop database. I've that up on Moodle there as well. So we'll use it. Obviously there's two things we can get from that. We can get a list of categories and we can get a list of products for categories. So we've kind of used the two of them as the thing. Okay. If you remember back, we used the movie database as an example at the very beginning and how to put together a JSON token. And you remember we had to use curl to communicate. You're going to have to use curl in this case, okay? Because we're communicating from one website, if you like, to a different website. So the client to the server. So curl is what we use, just the client URL. Now, the outline is to create a JWT based on the music shop since last year that will provide, or that can provide a list of categories if you ask for it. I could also provide, if you provide a category ID, can provide a list of instruments for that category. So that's essentially what we're going to be doing here. JWT client should, click on that, JWT client should allow you to access these services. the server will access the database and the functions that which the client will need to be able to do the following. Okay, you need to be able to request a token or API. Okay, what you decide to be in the payload is up to yourself. Okay, I don't mind, but put something in the payload. You need to be able to request a list of categories, and then if you provide a specific category ID, you need to be able to get a list of products for that category. Okay, how you call these things, the names you use, all up to yourself. Okay, so the suggested approach now for the server, it needs to have access to the JWT underscore class. It needs to have access to database.php to connect to the database. It needs to have functions to get categories and get products by category. Okay, it needs to be able to decode a request from the client, and needs to switch with a case for each client request. So a client, you should have a switch that we used last year in the controller, and you'd have different cases. One case is going to be to request a client or request a token. Another one will be to get the categories, and another one will be to get the products by category. So they're the requests you'll be looking for. So a possible approach would be something like this. You need to require it. You'll also, by the way, it's not in here, but you'll need to be able to, or you need to request access to the database, and you need to be able to request access to the function. So you'll have a require once for database.php and for functions.php. There's a secret key. Don't use Peter's key. That was just an example here. Unless of course your name's Peter, in which case it's fine. $API underscore key will be a filter input, so we'll be expecting it to come as a get variable as part of the URL, because we're using curl from the client, and then I'll just call it and service. So that's be whatever is the service. Okay, you're going to have specific stuff you're looking at. So again, the name and convention is up to yourself. If the API key is null, then you want to make sure that the service is something like request underscore key. So if the user isn't requesting a key, and whatever that is, the terminology has been used for that, and doesn't provide an API key, then you want to just give them an error message saying there's something wrong, or you got the wrong format, or you didn't provide an API key, or whatever you want to do. Okay, so that's the first bit. What it's doing here is it's echoing the JSON encode $response. So remember, all the time we're going to send back a string, and that needs to be a JSON string, okay, from the server, JWT server, to the client all the time. Okay, so do that and we exit. Otherwise, if we do have an API key, we come down here and we've got a case down which is request key. We might have a case here which is, get categories, and we might have another case which is get products by category, or whatever you're doing. Okay, so the client side then, and obviously there's code needed in there, and that's where you get your calling the functions and packaging stuff and that kind of stuff, but you're just echoing stuff back all the time. You need a form then to enter the username and password, send to the server to get the token. So that's on the client. That's if you're sending it, whatever it is you want. Okay, probably handy getting into doing something like that. Okay, and then we need to save the API key, perhaps on the session. So when you get the API key back, the client will need to have access to that all the time. So what we're looking at here is actually starting a session, and then we're actually creating an API key, session API key. Okay, which is going to be there. So that will mean that we can get access to the API key every time we click a button. You need a curl for each case, for each request. So I naturally would suggest the MVC. I'll use a type case from last year, but you might have different ideas on that. If you want, and with that essentially you're going to have maybe another of your menu items, or your get categories, and then another navigation is get products by category or something. If you really want a challenge, and this shouldn't be all that difficult really to put together, is why not implement the music app with curl getting access to JWT information from the server, JWT server, that should be. Getting all the data from that, not directly from the database, but from using the curls to do that. That would be a really interesting challenge, and if you've done that, you'd be well on the way to knowing how things are going. Okay, so I think it's time to do a little bit of coding, and thanks very much, and see you soon.